Dr. Douglas Jones, American certified allergist and immunologist, is with us today. Dr. Jones, welcome to Immunity Group Australia's podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm excited.
There are so many topics we will cover today, so I hope our listeners will stay on till the end. Um, Maybe I will start with a question that, everyone's dying to hear from you directly. What is Dr. Jones's international protocol for food adverse reactions, and why has it been so successful?
That is a great question, and I love talking about it. It's one of my favorite topics. So, my protocol is something that I've adopted and evolved over the course of over a decade. And it started with just kind of the basic, what we'd call oral immunotherapy, which we started over 11 years ago. But as time has gone on, and ironically, as I've dealt with my own health issues, it forced me to look and think outside of kind of a normal traditional approach of how I was trained. And even though I was dealing with separate health issues, as I was going through my own journey, I started thinking about all of the patients that I was treating and thinking about how I could approach them differently, how I could think about them differently, and utilize different modalities to try and make an even greater impact for my patients. And so I took a deep dive into various aspects of not just food allergy, but really how is the body communicating with us when we come in contact with certain foods, and why. And the bigger questions was, why does it happen one way for one person and another way for another person, and kind of answering some of those questions. And it led me to a lot of research into our microbiome, or when I say microbiome, what I mean by that, for those that may not know what that is our gut is comprised of trillions of bacteria, and a lot of those are very helpful and necessary for life and for proper digestion and immunity and hormones. And there's a connection with the brain and all kinds of functions within the body. And if that gets out of balance, or perhaps some bad bacteria start dominating over the good bacteria, it can really alter a lot of things within us. So I started looking at that. And also, as I was treating a lot of patients, what I also noticed was the psychosocial, or that mental emotional aspect, and how stress may play a role in what's going on with our gut and how we respond to food. So, kind of summarizing some of that, getting back to your question, is what is my protocol? My protocol is something that encompasses various aspects of psychosocial, that mental, emotional, physical aspect, and also involving how our gut microbiome. So it takes these different aspects, and instead of trying to fit every single person into a certain square or box, we like to customize and tailor what we're doing to really meet their needs. And I think as we really meet people where they are and guide them to where they want to go, as we're individualizing that, we've had tremendous success.
And Dr. Jones, tell me about technology. So over the last 11 years, you have been using technology and innovation really in the food allergy space. What is it in the US market in terms of technology that has helped you adapt your protocol to your patients and make it what it is, one of the most successful protocols in the world today?
Yeah, we've been able to utilize certain tests that we have available to us in our lab. One's called like a base cell activation test. Along with that panel, we're able to actually check a certain type of inflammation within our body. So it's not just that particular test, but it's also certain markers that come along with that test that give us better insight into inflammatory patterns within the body. And so we combine those types of tests with, again, other types of technology like microbiome mapping, or various what we call biomarkers within the blood, where I can get a good assessment of of the person and try to get to know them more as a person and really what's driving them. And so we're able to utilize that technology in a way that we can address various deficiencies or needs, whether it's like I talked about before, their microbiome being off, or maybe they have certain vitamin or nutrient deficiencies that we can bolster and do a lot of prep work even prior to starting our treatment program. And I have a phrase that's called the 6 Ps. Proper prior preparation prevents poor performance. And really, as we lead up to starting a treatment program, we want to make sure that we do that proper prior preparation, whether it's starting, for instance, counseling if somebody has severe anxiety, or addressing different needs within their body. That really helps set us up for success.
I was recently in Croatia, and speaking with their Professor Turkalj. She has introduced OIT in their public system 9 years ago. She was talking a lot about Xolair, how for the last 9 years she's actually incorporated omalizumab in her programs. Now, this is something that has been done in the US and in your clinic in the US for a long time. Can you please tell us why Xolair is so good, I guess, as a potential addition to food allergy programs, just on a basic level? How would we describe that to the listeners?
Sure. So, for those that may not know, there's a medication called Xolair that's spelled with an X. That's the trade name. The generic name is omalizumab. And within our body, whenever there's an allergic reaction, it's triggered by a protein called IgE. And what Xolair does is block that IgE. And so it kind of mops that IgE up. And so it changes the threshold by which somebody would react. And the simplest way that I can explain it is, if somebody has food allergy, and we use a metaphor and we liken it to a car, it's like if you're driving down the road in the car, you have an emergency measure if you're in an accident of an airbag deploying, and that can help protect you. I liken that to the airbag to an injectable epinephrine. Well, what omalizumab or Xolair would be is if you're now able to buckle your seatbelt. So you have one measure of the epinephrine. If you're in a reaction, you kind of have that measure of protection for emergency, but you also have a prevent. And by the way, the airbag deploys only when there's an accident, right? When it's hit. So that's an emergency. But for prevention, you're going to put on the seatbelt. So even though they're levels of protection, it's different. And so for omalizumab, it is not an emergency medicine, and I have to emphasize that it's not used for an acute reaction, but rather we can use that in a way as kind of a prevention, raise the threshold by which somebody would react. And currently it's FDA approved in the United States for use for people who want that extra measure of protection, but are still avoiding the foods. That's the current FDA approval. However, there is a stage 2 and 3 that's going on of their clinical trials, and many doctors in the United States, allergists, have used this medication more off-label, off the FDA-approved label, where we can use it in conjunction with oral immunotherapy. What it allows in that case is I've developed actually a protocol similar to ones that have been done in clinical trials. It's a little more conservative, but I've developed my own protocol with the use of Xolair, where we can use it in conjunction with oral immunotherapy. And typically what we'll see is less side effects, less reactions, but we can also move quicker. And so in my opinion, it helps to enhance the safety, the efficacy, and the speed by which we get through. And in some cases, I've even had where they were trying traditional oral immunotherapy and they were having, for whatever reason, many reactions, sometimes unexplainable. Even if we're accounting for all the variables, we add Xolair into those patients, and all of a sudden those reactions go down, and we're able to advance and eventually finish the program. So it's a nice addition, not necessary for every patient, but it's a nice thing to have in our tool bag.
And when you mentioned your colleagues, allergists, you recently had the biggest ever meeting of allergists from the United States who practice OIT in their clinical setting. Can you tell us about that grouping? You also had some international visitors. Tell us about how did this group begin? What is your role in it? And what was this meeting about?
Yeah, this is an exciting development. So about 9 years ago, there was three of us, me, another allergist named Richard Wasserman, and another one named Hugh Wyndham. We're all in the United States, came together and we co-founded a nonprofit organization. So it was solely dedicated to education and furthering the best practices of food allergy diagnostics and treatment. What we talked about in those initial meetings was first, we actually wanted to develop a patient registry where we were able to track data, across the country of people doing therapy. But we quickly saw more opportunity where we could foresee the day where this treatment, even back then when we started talking, it was brand new almost. We could foresee the day where it would become a standard of care. And we were concerned, though, that people were not going to be properly trained. They weren't going to have the proper education because at the time, a lot of the national academies and societies weren't doing anything about it. They weren't talking about it. In fact, they were uh, detrimental and telling us not to do what we were doing. Uh, so we were a little nervous or concerned that a lot of doctors may not have proper training, but they would try to do oral immunotherapy, and we did not want any bad outcomes from patients. So we decided to create a conference, first of all, to where we all could get together and discuss best practices and try to establish kind of some bounds by which allergists could practice and also have somebody to talk to. Because when we were in the field, we were alone. A lot of the times we didn't have support, and so we developed this conference, and our first one was 8 years ago, and it's grown ever since. And this past year is so exciting. We had our most participants ever of 180 participants were there. As you said, we had some visitors from even overseas. Dr. Gideon Lack was there from London, and he was. It was fantastic to have him there. He's so instrumental in spearheading a very key landmark study many years ago that has influenced every single allergist, I think, in the world. And so it was fantastic to have him attend and really boosted our conference. But we're going to continue to grow. We actually have, we collaborate, we've published several papers. And really, if you look at a majority of the care that's given across the United States, a lot of it's probably stemming from things gleaned and learned from this group. And I've never been a part of a more collegial, professional, and sharing group in my life, and it's so wonderful. I've been honored to be the president of this organization since we co-founded it. We continue to grow, and I think I think we'll continue to lead the way.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. And what I also saw on social media is there were nurses as well present. So can
Yes.
you tell us about different streams and different professions that come together into Dallas each year for this conference?
Yeah, that's a great point, Nina. So it's not just the allergist. So it's the allergist and their teams. So if the allergist has assistants or nurses that are working under their direction, they're also invited to come because we know that the importance of nurses, and they are often that front line communication between with the patient, and they have a lot of that interaction, and they take so much off our plate so that we can continue to expand our reach and impact to patients. And so we want the nurses and the assistants to be a part of that education. So any of the allergists and their teams actually are invited to attend.
And what were the main, I guess, outcomes of this year's conference?
This conference, we had a lot of discussion on something called sublingual immunotherapy. Oral immunotherapy probably has the most popularity just by name, but there's an emerging version called sublingual immunotherapy that's gathering a lot of attention. A lot of allergists are starting to implement this. So there's a lot of discussion about that. A lot of discussion actually on the biologic therapies like the Xolair that we talked about. There were discussions about adult immunotherapy because so much of the times when you read about headlines or see things in social media groups, it's all about children, but we tend to forget there's actually more adults in the world that have food allergy than children. And they're a massive population that I think is underserved. And so we want to push the barriers there and have great discussions about adult immunotherapy and treatments. And then we also have some discussions on upcoming diagnostics and different ways that we can go about treating it. A lot of it's about strategy, about how we can just best serve our patients.
When you mentioned headlines, we had a lot of headlines recently in Australia, actually, over the past week, about a rollout of peanut OIT across selected public hospitals in Australia. I mean, you have been collaborating with Australians for the past 11 years. More than 60 families actually moved to Utah, forming a compound of Aussies in Utah to access your protocol. So 11 years later, when you see these headlines in Australia, what comes to mind?
What took them so long? That's literally the first thing that comes to my mind is why did it take them so long? Because we've had actually, just to be positive, at least there's something happening there. But this does kind of trigger me just a little bit because this is something I've been advocating for since 2014 for Australia and hit many challenges and roadblocks along the way. And from what I've seen over the last decade is a lot of patients, thousands of patients, I think, kind of suffering because treatment's been withheld. And it's 10 years later. It's not that they didn't know about data. It's just, it seemed to me like a lot of it was just repeated from what was already done in the United States or Europe. It's interesting when I see headlines where it says first in the world. Not quite sure what that means since many of us have been doing this type of treatment or more for the last decade. I understand, they may have a different prebiotic or probiotic combined with the peanut flour. We do the same thing, though. Again, it's not really new information. And again, it may be nice that it may be becoming more available to many families that have been suffering and desperate for this type of treatment. However, again, what took so long? Because to me, it seems like there's been opportunities missed and thousands of patients that have had to seek care outside the country of Australia. They've had to go other places. And what's really interesting is if you think about the development of a child, years matter, months matter at times, but years definitely matter. And if you take somebody that's, say, 3, 4, 5 years old, and you withhold a treatment or withhold options for 5 years, that's a significant part of that child's development because they're entering from maybe infant or young childhood. And even as you get into teenage years, now the anxiety, now the psychosocial situations come up. And there's a lot more factors that play into this. Haven't even got into the cost burden that it can be for families. So the other thing is, it's just peanut, and peanut kind of has this thing we call it peanut privilege. And while it's great for those with peanut allergy, what about those with milk, egg, wheat, tree nuts, sesame? The list goes on. Why are we waiting? Why? Because our nonprofit organization actually, that I'm in charge of, we did a survey, published a letter in one of our major journals that showed over 129 allergists in the United States and Canada treating well over 26,000 patients. And these are very conservative figures. 95% of those patients were treated with quality food. We didn't need a pharmaceutical product. We didn't need, to raise the cost or limit access. And it wasn't just peanut. These 26,000 patients were treated with all kinds of foods, with quality food done by trained, educated allergists that are able to use that food correctly for the benefit of that patient and give them the choice and that freedom. Again, these things may not be available or may not be the answer for everyone, but I think everyone deserves the choice. I believe everyone deserves at least the access to be able to understand the pros, the cons, the risks, the benefits, and to see like where can we go from there. And I don't mean to be too negative, but some of I think what's coming across is just I have felt the frustration firsthand from thousands upon thousands of children, families, patients, when they see what's been happening in the United States and Europe for many years and wondering, why is this not happening with us?
Thank you. Thank you for this comprehensive response. And you're one of the few doctors in the world actually to even mention this psychosocial aspect. What I've seen in the last couple of days on social media is families who actually have started this peanut program in Australia begging for support from within
Yes.
allergy patient support communities. Now, you actually talk about this a lot in your philosophy. Can you
Yes.
tell us, and this is connected to your recent paper about anxiety being a potential hindrance to the success of OIT. Tell us a little bit more about this psychosocial element and how come you as a doctor actually emphasize this, because most doctors don't ever mention that psychological aspect.
Thank you for asking, because this is key. I mean, it's key. I've told people for years, when you're very first doing immunotherapy, everyone asks about the product, the protocol, how many times epinephrine are given, and those types of things. And I kind of liken it to COVID. When COVID was around, the news was just suffocating with these negative numbers of positive tests, ER visits, hospitalizations, deaths. But what they failed to mention so much of the time was, what's the economic impact that's happening? What's the psychosocial impact? What's the impact of the isolation that's happening? The cancer screenings that aren't taking place, the other care that's not being addressed, even perhaps the abuse that's going on at home because of the stressors that are there. So that, I think, was largely ignored because of this suffocating narrative that was happening. Well, if very similarly, when people start with immunotherapy, for instance, their sole focus is how many times has epinephrine been given? What's the product? What's the protocol? Can we pigeonhole everyone into this? I don't know if that's an Australian term or not, but can we, put everyone in the same box? That's how I started. But after treating hundreds, if not thousands of patients, what I realized is the product and the protocol is honestly the easy part. It really is. There's a whole nother system around that's surrounding this psychosocial aspect, the anxiety, the stressors, the stress on the families, the stress on the patient of having food allergy. And one thing that I needed to learn when I was first doing this was seeing patients go through the program and not just get physically desensitized, but get mentally and emotionally desensitized. And I did not truly comprehend the burden that families carry until it was lifted. I had no idea the impact of the weight that was on their shoulders until it was gone. That opened my eyes up to so many intangibles and the integrative impact that stress and mental and emotional stress can have on a person. And since that time, I have absolutely implemented and pay so much attention that I think I should have an honorary psychiatry degree right now. But that's okay, because when we can help guide them along that way, it can really make all the difference. And it's such an important aspect.
Well, my own daughter was the beneficiary of your protocol, and today she took egg and bacon sandwich to school. Finally, she will be a normal kid with egg and bacon sandwich at school, which is a
Right.
huge difference in quality of life. Dr. Johns, I've seen in the UK there is a movement to educate the frontline doctors, the general practitioners, because they
Mm-hmm.
don't have enough allergists, and the allergy care generally is really inadequate in the way it has been happening in the UK, according to the allergists themselves. How do you see this trend developing globally? I mean, in Australia, perhaps. How could GPs be educated more to deal with food allergies in particular, and asthma, really? Because patients firstly usually knock on the door of GPs.
Yeah, I think there's an avenue there. And, it's something obviously, we've been exploring. And I first kind of came across this concept years ago, because I was spending a lot of time in Australia and actually working with my team remotely back home in managing a lot of patients. And I've been on the forefront of educating a lot of docs, and I think if done carefully, done the right way with proper education, proper systems in place, and I can't emphasize that enough, proper education and proper systems in place, I do think there's an avenue for that. Um, and I think it would be awesome to be able to establish something like that, because it does extend the reach. Instead of patients having to go to the treatment, you can take the treatment to the patient. And I think that's an important aspect.
Dr. Johns, thank you very much for your time today. We're very grateful for your wisdom. And tell us about your book. You are writing a book.
I am. It's I'm not going to say a whole lot about it just yet, other than it's in the works, and I'm excited to finally make this happen. So uh, people can look forward to that.
We look forward to reading about Dr. Johns's philosophy and its sources and origins. Thank you very much.